In 1847, a 12-year-old boy boarded a train in Bath, England, carrying a ticket that shouldn't exist. The date printed on it was 3 weeks in the future. When railway officials investigated, they discovered something that still gives me chills. This boy had been dead for 2 years. What I'm about to tell you comes from the sealed archives of the Great Western Railway, documents that were buried by government order and only surfaced decades later. This isn't just a ghost story, this is a documented case of time travel that challenges everything we think we know about reality. The morning of September 23, 1847. Paddington Railway Station, London. Thick autumn fog blankets the platform as the 6:30 train from Bath pulls in right on schedule. Nothing unusual, until the passengers start getting off. Among them is a boy maybe 12 years old wearing Victorian clothes that somehow look wrong. Too perfect. Too advanced for 1847. But that's not what catches the attention of Railway Inspector Vincent Blackwood, a 20-year veteran who's seen it all. It's the boy's ticket. The date stamped on it reads October 15, 1847. 3 weeks and 5 days in the future. A chronological impossibility that makes Blackwood's head spin. But here's where this story gets really disturbing. When they question the boy, who calls himself Edmund, he doesn't act confused or scared like you'd expect. He speaks with perfect English, but uses phrases and references that don't exist yet. Even worse, he knows things about the railway system that haven't been implemented. Schedule changes planned for next month. New safety protocols still being discussed in board meetings. Technical details about locomotives that are purely theoretical. When they ask how he knows these things, Edmund gives them an answer that will haunt everyone involved. I know because I've already lived these days. The investigation reveals there's no record of Edmund boarding at any station along the route. Security is tight on Victorian railways, every passenger is documented. Yet somehow this boy appeared on a moving train with a ticket that couldn't exist, carrying knowledge he shouldn't have. Dr. Nathaniel Pemberton from the Royal Society gets called in to examine what they're dealing with. For 3 days he runs tests on Edmund, and what he discovers defies every law of science. The boy describes invisible waves that carry messages through the air, a perfect description of radio technology that won't be invented for another 50 years. He talks about carriages that move without horses, powered by internal explosions, internal combustion engines that are barely theoretical concepts in 1847. But the most chilling part? Edmund describes the Great Exhibition of 1851 in vivid detail, including specifics about the Crystal Palace that haven't been publicly disclosed yet. He's describing the future like it's his past. While scientists are trying to figure out what Edmund is, other passengers from that same train start reporting weird experiences. The journey felt longer than it should have. The light coming through the windows had a strange quality, like time itself was different. Conductor Helena Mortimer notices something that makes her question her sanity. During a ticket check at Reading Station, the clock in their train car shows a different time than the station clock. A 23-minute difference that can't be explained by mechanical error. The engineer checks his instruments, everything's working perfectly. Somehow, time flowed differently inside that specific train car. Weather records from that day reveal another impossible detail. Between Bath and Reading, there was extraordinarily dense fog from 7:30 to 8:15 a.m., a weather pattern so unusual it was documented as inexplicable by meteorological observers. But witnesses described this fog as having an almost luminous quality, creating visual effects that distorted perception of distance and movement. Engineer Augustus Grimsby, with over 10 years' experience on that route, reports that the locomotive felt like it was moving through something denser than air, as if space itself had become thicker. As days pass, something starts happening to Edmund that's even more disturbing than his impossible arrival. He begins to fade. Not physically, but in some other way that doctors can't classify. His presence becomes less defined, like he's slowly losing connection with the time period he's in. Sometimes he responds to questions that weren't asked, or reacts to events that only exist in his perception. Dr. Pemberton documents this as gradual dissolution of personal temporal coherence. Edmund starts speaking about his life in different time periods simultaneously, mixing childhood memories from the 1840s with experiences that clearly belong to a distant future. He mentions boxes that show images of distant places, and machines that calculate faster than 100 men, descriptions that won't make sense until the 20th century. The case attracts secret attention from Parliament members and renowned scientists who prefer to keep their identities hidden. Recently discovered correspondence suggests that Lord Rutherford himself was aware of the case and developed theories about temporal currents that could, under extraordinary circumstances, allow consciousness to move through time. Meanwhile, Edmund continues providing information that proves prophetically accurate. He describes the cholera epidemic that will ravage London the following winter with medical knowledge that won't be understood for years. He predicts political changes, including the fall of governments and rise of figures still unknown to the public. Most disturbing are his technological predictions. He draws sketches of machines that won't be invented for decades, electric lighting systems, long-distance communication devices, even basic concepts of mechanical flight. When asked how he knows these things, Edmund's answer never changes: "I've already seen them working." On October 10, 1847, 5 days before the date on his impossible ticket, Edmund begins showing physical signs that terrify everyone watching. His image occasionally shimmers, like being seen through moving water. Dr. Pemberton notices these distortions intensify during specific times, particularly when trains depart Paddington Station bound for Bath. Edmund explains he feels an irresistible pull during these moments, like an invisible force trying to drag him back to the correct time. Then, on the morning of October 15, 1847, exactly the date printed on his temporal ticket, Edmund disappears. Not dramatically. Not with fanfare. He simply ceases to be present. Like he quietly left a room except no one saw him move. The only trace left behind is his railway ticket, found on Platform 3. Still dated October 15, 1847, but now it's been stamped with the station's arrival seal, as if Edmund had completed a circular journey through time, returning to the exact moment of his departure. But here's where this impossible story becomes a nightmare. Dr. Pemberton spends months trying to trace Edmund's origins. His investigation leads to a small village near Bath, where he finds birth records for Edmund Caldwell, born 1835, son of a local clockmaker. When Pemberton visits the family, he discovers that Edmund had died of fever 2 years earlier, in 1845. If Edmund died in 1845, how could he board a train in 1847? And if the boy who appeared in London was really Edmund Caldwell, which version disappeared that October morning, the 10-year-old who died, or some temporal projection of a life he never got to live? Cemetery records confirm Edmund's burial in March 1845. But when Dr. Pemberton gets permission to examine the remains, he finds the coffin empty. The gravedigger swears he buried the boy personally but can't explain the disappearance. This discovery leads Pemberton to develop a theory that would be considered insane by Victorian standards but sounds eerily plausible today. He theorizes that death might not be an absolute end of consciousness, but a transition to nonlinear temporal existence. According to this hypothesis, Edmund continued living after his physical death, experiencing future events as present reality, until some unknown force pulled him back into normal time flow. Private correspondence reveals that Pemberton wasn't alone in documenting these phenomena. An informal network of researchers was secretly cataloging similar cases across Britain. In 1851, a woman appeared at York Station carrying a newspaper dated 3 months in the future. Like Edmund, she knew things that hadn't happened yet and vanished on the exact date of her impossible documents. In 1849, an elderly man was found in Edinburgh with coins that wouldn't be minted for years. He described city changes that hadn't been planned yet and disappeared right on schedule. The pattern was always the same: impossible knowledge of future events, gradual loss of temporal coherence, and disappearance on the specific date linked to their anachronistic evidence. Pemberton developed a theory that railway technology had accidentally created temporal windows, electromagnetic conditions that allowed displaced consciousness to emerge from different time periods. Decades later, this theory gained unexpected support when German physicist Friedrich von Zimmermann developed equations suggesting the possibility of space-time folds that could permit interaction between different temporal periods. Modern quantum physics doesn't completely rule out these possibilities. Concepts like quantum entanglement and superposition suggest reality is far more fluid than classical physics assumed. But Pemberton's research went much further than anyone knew. Documents sealed until 1984 reveal he spent decades conducting secret experiments, trying to replicate the conditions that brought Edmund into the wrong time. Using electromagnetic fields, mechanical vibrations, and specific geological configurations, Pemberton created what he called temporal instability windows, brief periods when sensitive observers reported anomalous experiences. During these controlled experiments, other temporally displaced figures appeared. A woman in 18th-century clothing manifested in 1851, speaking about the French Revolution with eyewitness precision while also predicting political developments decades in the future. In 1856, a man apparently from the 16th century emerged in Pemberton's improvised laboratory. He demonstrated knowledge of navigation techniques that wouldn't be developed for centuries, describing instruments he claimed to have seen on great ships of the future. Pemberton discovered he could tune his apparatus to different historical periods, as if time had distinct frequencies that could be accessed through appropriate technology. The most extraordinary experiment occurred in 1863, when Pemberton established two-way communication with a displaced mathematician apparently from the 20th century. For over 2 hours, this figure provided detailed information about mathematical developments 50 years in the future, including concepts related to relativity theory. Even more disturbing, the temporal mathematician was familiar with Pemberton's work, suggesting that research on these phenomena would continue in future decades, that investigators across different eras were connected in an impossible collaborative network spanning time itself. Pemberton's experiments revealed that certain astronomical events, particularly complex planetary magnetic alignments, significantly amplified temporal anomaly probability. During solar eclipses or intense solar activity, his electromagnetic apparatus became notably more effective. He also discovered that specific weather patterns created environments conducive to spontaneous temporal displacements. Combinations of low atmospheric pressure, high humidity, and electrical activity, exactly the conditions present during Edmund's impossible journey. Based on these discoveries, Pemberton developed a prediction system for natural temporal anomalies. His records show precise forecasts of various incidents subsequently confirmed by independent witnesses. His work explored profound philosophical implications. If different temporal versions of the same person could exist simultaneously, what did this mean for personal identity and consciousness continuity? One particularly notable case involved a woman who appeared in 1859, speaking about her life in 3 different time periods simultaneously, describing 18th century childhood, 19th century adult experiences, and future life events as equally real memories. This led Pemberton to propose that individual consciousness might be temporally distributed across multiple epochs, with only fragments manifesting in any specific period. During the 1870s, Pemberton conducted experiments with human volunteers. While none achieved complete temporal transfer, several participants reported extraordinary experiences, vivid visions of different historical periods and moments of intuitive knowledge about future events. One volunteer, engineer Gabriel Fairfax, developed apparently precognitive abilities after the experiments. 4 months afterward, he consistently predicted railway technology changes that wouldn't be implemented for years. His accuracy was so remarkable that railway companies began secretly consulting him about future developments. Fairfax's prophetic abilities eventually attracted unwanted official attention, forcing Pemberton to suspend human experiments and focus on spontaneous manifestations. Pemberton's final records document over 200 cases of anomalous temporal experiences reported throughout the British railway system between 1850 and 1883. The pattern suggested these weren't isolated events but manifestations of systematic phenomena related to accelerated technological development. He theorized that rapid introduction of technologies fundamentally altering human relationships with space and time, particularly railways and telegraphy, created tensions in temporal fabric that occasionally manifested as consciousness displacements through different epochs. This theory would prove prophetic when even more revolutionary technologies, radio, television, computers, internet, created new forms of temporal and spatial connectivity transcending traditional physical limitations. Pemberton's work can be seen as the first systematic scientific study of technology's effects on human perception of time and reality. His final sealed letter included detailed instructions for future researchers, electromagnetic apparatus diagrams, formulas for optimal configurations, and experimental protocols. Most significantly, he included a temporal map showing connections between different historical periods based on observed patterns. The map suggested certain epochs were more strongly interconnected than others, creating temporal bridges where consciousness transfers were more likely. The period 1840 to 1860 represented a particularly active temporal nexus, explaining the high frequency of anomalies during those years. Pemberton predicted similar periods of intense temporal activity would occur during other epochs of accelerated technological transformation, suggesting the late 20th and early 21st centuries could witness resurgent phenomena. Contemporary research in quantum physics and consciousness studies has begun providing theoretical frameworks that could eventually explain these documented phenomena. Quantum non-locality, temporal entanglement, and multiple universe theories offer scientific possibilities no longer automatically dismissed. The Edmund Caldwell case remains archived in Great Western Railway records, officially catalogued as an administrative irregularity without resolution. But for those willing to examine evidence with open minds, it represents something far more significant, a window into temporal mysteries our science has barely begun to contemplate. The documents were sealed by government order in 1852, officially to protect British scientific reputation from harmful speculation. However, recently discovered correspondence suggests the true motivation was fear that public disclosure could cause social panic or destabilize confidence in the expanding railway system. More than 170 years later, that Victorian railway line still operates on essentially the same route Edmund traveled that impossible morning. Experienced engineers and conductors occasionally report unusual sensations during certain weather conditions, especially when dense fog envelopes the landscape between Bath and Reading. Local residents still occasionally report sightings of a solitary boy in Victorian clothes near the railway line, particularly during foggy mornings reminiscent of September 1847. These reports, though never officially investigated, suggest some aspects of the phenomenon may persist as temporal echoes occasionally visible to sensitive observers. The railway tracks still carry echoes of that impossible journey, whispering to those willing to listen that the mysteries of time may be far more accessible to human experience than official science recognizes. Edmund's story challenges our fundamental understanding of consciousness, time, and reality. Whether his experience represented authentic glimpses of hidden aspects of existence or manifestations of latent human potential, it continues to question absolute limitations we assume govern our universe. For investigators brave enough to explore territories where documented reality meets extraordinary possibility, each discovery reveals new horizons of mystery. The boundaries of time may be far more permeable than we dare imagine. If you're drawn to these investigations where history and mystery intertwine, where preserved evidence documents impossibilities that challenge our understanding of reality, there are dozens more cases waiting to be explored. Each rediscovered archive, each preserved testimony brings us closer to understanding profound secrets connecting past, present, and future in ways we're still learning to contemplate. The train lines still run their courses, carrying passengers between destinations across landscapes that once witnessed impossible journeys through time itself. And sometimes, in early morning fog reminiscent of that September day in 1847, you might glimpse fleeting shadows of a boy forever caught between one moment and the next, living proof that time's boundaries are far more fragile than we ever imagined.